I'm worried. So I've covered politics for NBC affiliates, PBS affiliates my whole adult life, and this is the worst I've ever seen it. I think our political situation is worse than any time since the Civil War. We seem to be living in a post-fact, truth-optional society. We've seen the polarization, not just of the political parties to the point where we can't have bipartisanship anymore, but also the media. You have media outlets on the far left or far right that don't even have any pretense of being accurate or really showing the news. Society's divided. All of us have lost friends over politics. It's replaced religion as the topic you can't talk about. And I think the worst thing is we've lost this sense of civility in our politics. It used to be based on compromise and cooperation, consensus, coalition building. Today we've lost a sense of civility. We've lost basic decency. You have candidates like Donald Trump that are unconventional in a number of ways, but who have outright made fun of the disabled, flailing around on stage, made fun of prisoners of war, made fun of Gold Star families. A Gold Star family is someone who buried their child serving in the military. He's made fun of John McCain, an American hero. He brags about molesting women and accosting women. 20-some allegations of molestation and sexual harassment and rape. And this is the candidates we're electing for office. So we have an election this November, and I really feel that what's truly on the ballot in November is the rule of law and the future of our democracy. I know it's an overused phrase, but we're at a crossroads, and I fear that we go the wrong way. This could be the beginning of the end of what we know as constitutionalism in the United States.
But why do so many people, in fact, so many of your colleagues, follow Donald Trump?
Well, if you go back and you look at history, we didn't have public opinion polls historically, which is a good thing. First public opinion poll was George Gallup in 1933. But if we had polling, Hitler would have been popular among part of his constituents. Mussolini would have been popular in Italy, Salazar in Portugal, Tojo in Japan, Stalin in Russia, Franco in Spain. If you could go all the way back to Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun, they were probably popular. People have the right to back whomever they want, and I think part of it is fear. What we've seen is if you want to be effective, if I appeal to your better instincts and try to make you like me and I show you I'm honest, that may or may not get you to do something. But if I scare the you-know-what out of you and place the fear of God into you, you'll do it. So fear-mongering, blame-mongering, scapegoating, us versus them, xenophobia, jingoism, this is a long history. We saw it in the KKK here in the United States, the Know Nothing Party, the Birch Society, the Millerites. We've seen a spike in hate crimes toward the black, gay, immigrant communities, an unprecedented spike in hate crimes against the Jewish community. And it's all generated from this fear-mongering. You don't want to lay all the blame at Donald Trump's feet, but you have someone with a national pulpit who, in fact, there was a study done of his thousands of tweets while he was president. Over half of his tweets were attacking American citizens. A young actress, just a civilian. This is conduct unbecoming of a leader. So I think we're really at a crossroads, and people are prone to believe darn near anything. I guess I'd say lastly on that is, you hear a message enough, people tend to believe it. If I say to you, Martin, did you know, and then I say something utterly implausible, you'll think I'm nuts. About the fourth or fifth time you hear it, you call your friends and say, did you know? We were talking earlier, you and I. I write books and don't sleep much, stay up late at night, giving myself an aggressive deadline. So sometimes I am just dead exhausted, so I turn the television on just so there's noise, and every once in a while I'll look at the TV, then I'll go back and work on chapter 12. And I find this happening all the time. I'll see a commercial for Taco Bell and hear the ding, and I'm thinking, oh, that toxic hell, who would eat there? But about the third or fourth commercial, when I hear the ding, I'm like Pavlov's dogs. I'm salivating. And the next day I go and get Taco Bell at the drive-thru, and I'm like, why did I do this? Commercials, advertising, messaging, this is all a science. And this is done in a way to manipulate people, and we're oftentimes too gullible and receptive to these messages that are destructive and are complete lies.
But aren't you shocked at how many smart people are buying into them? People who know better.
Well, we would like to think everybody knows better. Everybody has the right to do what they want. They have the right to make an informed or an uninformed decision. I have people that come to me all the time and say, can you believe that, and then they say something a politician did, and I'll say, they didn't do that. Or they'll say, oh, well, at least they're doing this, and I'll go, they're not doing that. Oh, yeah, they are. And then I'll show them evidence, and they'll claim that that's a lie. So we've lost a sense of critical thinking. We seem to be, as I said earlier, we're a post-truth, fact-optional society, but we've lost a sense of rationality and reason. Some of the things they're accusing people of, it's utterly implausible. The conspiracy theories, for example. The huge conspiracy theory that Hillary Clinton and the Democrats were running a child porn operation through the basement of a pizza parlor in Washington. And you had all these talkers on radical right-wing radio saying this over and over again, to the point where people were believing this, to the extent that that one fellow from the mid part of the country loads his car with guns and drives across the country. He calls and leaves a goodbye to his children message because he's going to save all the children. He arrives at the pizza parlor, busts in with guns. There isn't even a basement at the pizza parlor. Everybody's just eating. The FBI come in and drag him away. People are believing the utterly implausible and conspiracy. So we've got to find a way of injecting civility and reason and rationality back into our politics, as well as compromise. You and I are friends. And we could agree on 9 issues, but if we disagree on one, it's not going to end our friendship. But in today's political climate, you're my enemy, and I'd end that friendship. You and I might disagree on the budget. How do we put the budget together? I would submit that over a beer and a good dinner and some jazz music, you and I could solve the budget. Because we'd compromise and we'd work together, and I might not get everything I want. You might not get everything you want, but that's life. But today we've lost that ability to sit down civilly in a fact-based manner and find some degree of consensus. And that's the foundation of a viable democracy. So I'm extremely worried about it.
You say you're worried. I am kind of stunned by what's going on. I mean, it sounds like you might be as well, even though you have the historical perspective.
You know, I used to always say that, you know, if you look at whether it's Hitler or Mussolini, Genghis Khan, Tojo, Stalin, Franco, people always say, I can't believe it happened in that culture. You know, German scientific, academic, and educational institutions were the envy of the world. Hitler comes to office and they're believing up is down and left is right and committing the most heinous crimes in history. The kicker is, how could it happen in these viable cultures like Italy and Spain? The answer is, it's happened everywhere all the time throughout history. History's written in blood. And I always say, as an historian, it's hard to not be an alcoholic and a complete depressive when you read all this. But we always like to think it couldn't happen here. American exceptionalism. We're the exception to the rule. You know, our history, we had slavery for centuries. Southerners sent their sons to die to keep slavery. We committed genocide against the American Indian. The 1830 Indian Removal Act, the Trail of Tears. It slaughtered the Creek, the Cherokee, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, genocide against American Indians. And the person that did it was President Andrew Jackson, who's on our $20 bill today. So we've had a long history of fear replacing fact, paranoia and conspiracy replacing truth and civility. And so this is simply the latest iteration, but probably the worst since the Civil War.
Are we that gullible?
People are. You know, I mean, P.T. Barnum is born and for your students, that's a circus carnival show, Barker. A sucker's born every minute. And again, I guess with, you know, I do town halls a couple times a week. I lecture in the community. I travel around and lecture at museums, battlefields, and historic sites around the country. And the stuff people say. For example, I have a book on World War II and the Holocaust. And in 2017, I did like a 30-plus city tour around the country selling my book, which is wonderful. Talking about your book is like talking about your grandkids, right? But I counted, I had 7 people confront me screaming at literary events that the Holocaust never happened. Now, one, you know, I knew that people didn't believe in it, but I never had anybody yell it to my face with veins popping out and their eyes bulging, wanting to fight me. But I had it multiple times at literary festivals and book talks. You would think by self-selection that you wouldn't attract that crowd. But what I realized I was guilty of was, you know, living in a bubble. You know, I'm in academia. You're around people that are paid to be critical thinkers and open-minded, one would think and hope. And you're around bright-eyed, enthusiastic 19-year-olds with an iPad in their backpack. You'd like to think. But goodness gracious. Gullibility seems to be the norm rather than the exception.
As a distinguished professor, what is your role in trying to right these lies?
So I would say that I don't have these kind of lectures in my classes. I talk about the Federalist Papers, the Battle of Gettysburg, the D-Day landings in 1944 in France. But my goal in every single class I teach, irrespective of politics, justice, history, philosophy, my goal is critical thinking. I make the students debate in my classes. I make them put their own amendment to the Constitution together and make them defend their positions. I try to expose them to new ways of thinking. If they agree with A, I argue B or disagree with them. Critical thinking is probably the best thing we can do. Secondly, in anything that I do, I try to instill a love of learning. You can inspire your journalism students, but you only have X number of days with them. If you can get them to either love journalism or love learning, they'll be lifelong learners and they'll teach themselves vastly more than you and I could ever teach them. I think that should be writ large our goals in society, to return a love of learning, to return a sense of critical thinking. Good gracious. President Trump said, who knew Puerto Rico was an island? The answer, everyone. He said, I didn't know Finland was a country. The answer, everybody knew that. Who knew that healthcare would be difficult? At his inaugural, at a big parade rather, he threw in Washington, he was saying that the Americans during the Revolutionary War in the 1770s and 1780s fought the British and we fought them at our airports. Air travel didn't come in for I mean, we've got to.
But Professor, they buy it.
People buy it. But therein is the issue. We've got to promote, and you're free to agree or disagree. You can vote Democrat, you can vote Republican, you can not vote, you can be liberal, conservative, populist, libertarian, you can be an anarchist or a fascist. That's your business. But we've got to promote critical thinking. We've got to promote a love of learning. For instance, the President, Trump, was anti-intellectual. There's no question about it. He made fun of educated people. He made fun of, why would you listen? I've never read a book, as if that's a badge of honor. I'm mortified to hear that someone didn't read a book. But I've found in my own life, when I do town halls and I do public events, if someone disagrees with me, they'll oftentimes say, well, you're an egg-headed professor in the ivory tower. Why should I listen to you? And I don't say this, but the answer is because I've spent 30-some years reading exactly what you asked me to talk about, and you haven't even thought about it. The same way, I'm not going to get my next-door neighbor to do open-heart surgery. I'm going to a famous surgeon. The same way, I'm not going to get my cousin to fix my car. I'm going to a mechanic because I don't want the brakes to not work. Expertise seems to be optional these days. You have on news outlets, and I put news in finger quotes, or prominent people, evolution is bunk. COVID doesn't exist. Climate change doesn't exist. You have people that never took a biology class weighing in on these issues. Who would believe this? If you're going to tell me all about, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, I want to make sure you're a philosopher, right? If you're a baker, I might not listen to everything. But if you're a philosopher and you're telling me the best way to cook, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to listen to the baker. So it's an anti-intellectualism where people that are quote unquote learned or that have information are devalued. It's all knee-jerk kind of reactionaryism, and that's a deep structural problem that we face.
What should be the role of journalists?
Part of it is fact-checking. We have some online fact-checking organizations. There's PolitiFact. There's Project Vote Smart. There's Open Secrets. There's actually one called Fact Checker. The Washington Post does this. So, a good journalist will do their homework on the topic. They'll source it. But what they need to do is make sure when they source it for a quote, they're getting a true expert. Now, there's a difference between a fact and an opinion. People are entitled to their opinions, but are not entitled to their facts. They need to source it, and they also need to fact check it. If somebody is obviously lying, it's a journalist's responsibility to either A, not give that a pulpit, or B, say this is their opinion, but it doesn't square with the facts. They said the budget deficit was this big, when in fact it's this big. Right. So the journalist has to have that. A journalist's job is to not just hold a microphone in front of someone and give them airtime. The journalist is the expert on fact-checking, sourcing, and all that, and we need to do a better job of calling people out. Now, that's not to say you wear your opinions on your sleeve if you're a journalist. I am not a journalist. Right now, I'm not speaking as a professor. I'm speaking as Robert Watson, so I'm allowed to have my opinions. Moreover, I've published 48 books and hundreds of articles. I think I've earned my right to weigh in on these issues. I've lived these issues. I have hundreds of footnotes and hundreds of primary sources in every book. So, But a journalist has to make sure they fact check and they're getting the right sources. Moreover, as we saw the last few years, if someone gets up and spews racist, sexist, homophobic, anti-Semitic venom, a journalist giving them an unfettered, unchecked pulpit will allow that to fester in society. So if that's being done, they need to then put someone on afterward who says, this kind of language toward the Jewish, black, gay, et cetera communities is not healthy, and here's the facts. And not just give them a pulpit. And I think part of it is major media outlets have either just thrown the truth out the window or they've not done their job. And that has contributed to this alarming spike in the last couple of years of an increase in hate crimes and this incivility and dysfunction that defines the body politic today.
If you were to advise students or adults to go to a particular news source as a reader, where do they go?
Number one, use multiple news sources. You shouldn't just get all your information from CBS. You should look at CBS and NBC. There's a lot online, but number two, students need to know that much of what's online or social media or on this has not been spell checked. So I get people all the time that say, you were wrong at your town hall, and then they'll show me a tweet. And it starts off with a grammatical error. I'm like, really? You're going to believe that? So a lot of what's online is not spell checked, it's not fact checked, it's not peer reviewed, it's not refereed, and it's not run by a professional editor or producer. So we need to realize that. Multiple sources, fact check on your own. As I mentioned a moment ago, PolitiFact, Open Secrets, Project VoteSmart, Fact Checker. There's a lot of these organizations out there that are objective, professional, and they fact check Democrats and Republicans. I've been fact checked by a few of them. And it's an unnerving call when you get a call that they're fact checking something I wrote or said on the news. Happily, we checked out. But so consult that before you take the opinion of some radio talker who has absolutely no credentials in what they're talking about. I'm not going to tell you what to do about dentistry because I don't know anything about dentistry. So people shouldn't listen to someone who's never, as I said, taken a biology class weigh in on climate change. Instead, you should listen to the 99% of the world's eminent scientists who have spent their lives compiling facts on the issue.
A student who wants to get involved politically, who wants to be an activist, one side or the other, what do they do? Where do they go?
Easy to do. Every city, every county has a Democratic club, a Republican club, and other political clubs, and these clubs are usually just senior citizens. They're dying for some young kid to show up. I always tell my students, and I challenge them, I said, if you show up to the local Dem or Republican club meeting and you introduce yourself, somebody there is going to say, here's the membership application. Would you like to be the treasurer or secretary? They'll find themselves ahead of their social media or whatever. So it's easy to get involved. Number two, volunteer at the campaign. 2024 is an election cycle, and an important one at that. Every campaign has volunteers, phone banking, yard signs, knocking on doors. I mean, just all sorts of things. Stopping and picking up the donuts and pizza for the office, to the very fundamental, legitimate things. But they all need volunteers, so those are two really easy ways to do it. Or just go online. Find a social media platform that's legitimate and factual, and then you can forward that. You can like it, you can post it, you can forward it. Get your friends in a group chat and talk about the challenges facing this generation. This generation is going to inherit the mess that our generation made. So they have skin in the game. Or just find one thing if you're not interested in politics, probably everybody in this generation is interested in the environment. Conservation issues, saving the polar bear, clean air, losing our, the polar ice caps. Then blog about it. Go join an environmental group in the area. It's very easy to do.
And the journalists themselves, the student journalists, should do the same thing?
I think they should do the same thing. As a journalist, and you know this far better than I, it's one of the world's most difficult and challenging professions. Because if you're a knee surgeon, what do you do all day? Operate on knees. As a journalist, you could have one story in the morning, another story in the afternoon, another. You have to be an expert on nuclear power, the opening of a mall, a police shooting, and you only have hours to get up to snuff. So I think journalists can arm themselves preemptively, if you will, by being active in the community, making contacts, learning as much as they can about issues in their community, so that if there is a situation and they need a source, they have a Rolodex, which is, your students might not know what a Rolodex is. It's a file of information on important people. So if you meet a doctor and there's a medical issue, you can call that doctor and say, tell me what I need to know about, leukemia or whatever the issue is.
Do you worry about the election this year and what's going to happen?
I do, absolutely. We saw with the previous election, there's a long and proud history in the United States of peaceful, civil transfers of power. When a person loses, they give a concession speech, and the tanks don't roll out on the streets. Donald Trump was the first president who did not give a concession, did not have a peaceful transfer, civil transfer of power. Instead, he claimed that it was lies and fraud and the election was stolen. They never offered evidence that how it was stolen, and the kicker was multiple court cases with Republican and Trump-appointed judges found that there was no fraud. In fact, two of the states where they were alleging it all, Georgia and Arizona, the elections officials that determined Biden won were all Republicans. The voting machines were bought by Republicans. So I worry that the genie's out of the bottle. It's going to be hard to put that genie back in the bottle. Any election that people don't like now, they're going to claim it was fraud, and people are going to believe that. At the same time, we've seen efforts all around the country to suppress voting. Early voting, it's being shrunk, less days. Voting by mail, it's getting harder to vote by mail. They're closing precincts. In some states, college campuses can't be precincts. College campus should always be a precinct. That's where you vote, because it's a lot of parking, everybody knows where it is, and young people can vote. But certain politicians don't like that young people are going to vote for a certain party. In Alabama and other places, they've just flat out closed precincts in the black community. This is Jim Crow racism like it was 100 and some years ago. So with all the attacks on registering to vote, closing precincts, limiting early voting, limiting absentee, I fear that a lot of people are not going to vote who otherwise would vote. And then no matter who wins, the loser is going to claim it was fraud. So I'm very worried about that.
And what about the legal system, which seems to be so frustrated right now in its inability to deal with a president who probably is corrupt?
Well, as we're speaking, there's well over 90 charges and multiple indictments, and there's several left over complicity with January 6th, not only inciting violence against the Capitol, but ordering that the metal detectors be taken down when he knew people were coming armed. The evidence is, his own team has said that he was prepped on that, to telling them, don't warn the Congress or the Capitol Police that they're coming, to Georgia, where he's on tape telling officials to just find me votes to change the election, to other states where he and his advisors are on tape, and his advisors have testified that they tried to seat fake electors, people to just go in and quick change the election. That's treasonous.
But Professor Watson,
yeah, the legal system's not dealing with it.
Right.
It's shocking. What we've seen is our legal system is only as good as the judges we appoint to institute the law, to enact the law. And you're seeing justices and judges who I don't know where they got their law degree. I'm not a lawyer, but I've spent my life reading the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, and the law. I read some of the rulings and I go, I don't know how that's constitutional. The law, by definition, the way it's supposed to grind slowly. The worst thing we want to do is quickly overreact. So everybody has their day in court. It's just that this is dragged on year after year after year, to the point where a lot of Americans are saying the system's corrupt. Why should I have faith in the system? Young African-American guy is grabbed and they throw the book at him on a minor first offense. You have multiple acts of treason and undermining national security, and nothing happens. So it's, I don't know. I don't have an answer. I've been scratching my head. All I can say is we've never seen this before. Fasten your seatbelt, Martin. This election is going to be a roller coaster of a ride.